Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. My name is Fakir S. Aijazuddin, and I have the pleasure of interacting with you in this particular brief recollection of my years at Aitchison College, Lahore. I've had three different persona in Aitchison, and my relationship was at three ages. One was as a student. I joined in 1950, in January 1950, and I was there first as a day boy, and then my parents put me as a boarder in Leslie Jones' house. And I remained in Leslie Jones' house for about 8 months, 9 months. I couldn't understand why, because I was actually, my house was in Davis Road, which was just within walking distance. But I discovered afterwards it was because they were preparing me for schooling in England. So I was at Aitchison from 1950, as I say, till 1953. And then I went to England, where I completed my studies, primary and then secondary studies in chartered accountancy. When I came back, I was working here and I went to Abu Dhabi. But while I was in Abu Dhabi, Babar Ali Sahab asked me to write the history of Aitchison College for the centenary. So it was in 1886 so I did. And at that time, Mr. Barry was still alive, who was the preceding principal between 1933 and 46. So I had the pleasure of meeting him, talking to him, and interviewing him, rather like you're interviewing me now. And so I came back, and when we came back from Abu Dhabi, my son, Kumail, joined Aitchison College. He was at another institution, but I was determined that he should join Aitchison, partly because the then principal, Mr. Rahman Qureshi, was extremely keen that a member of the family should continue with the school. And so he was there for about 8 years. And subsequently, to my surprise, I was asked to become the principal of Aitchison College. So what began as a journey in 1950, in 2008, continued now in the capacity as a principal. Aitchison College, I had known intimately, both at every level, but the important thing for us was that there was a family association with Aitchison. My ancestor, Fakir Aijazuddin, had been one of the original founder members of Aitchison, and he had donated what was at that time a princely sum of 50 rupees or 75 rupees or something. And that was regarded as a generous donation. So he and then Fakir Jalaluddin, who was the owner of the Fakir Khana Museum, which you've heard about, Fakir Jalaluddin then won the Godly Medal, I think, or he won the medal, and Leal Medal, and he was one of the better students. I'm not sure that all the other members of the family lived up to that standard, but nevertheless, they were there. So that's really the background and the reason of my association, my eligibility, if you like, and qualifications for talking to you about Aitchison. I'm not sure there's a direct connection between them, but there's an amusing connection, and that is that when we were, there was kind of, even in those days, there was an English medium and Urdu medium, okay? So many of the boys who came from the rural areas would speak in their own dialect, and koi Multan se aaya tha, Sargoda se, Miyawali se, ya Pathan bacche the, ya Swat se the, and the others were urbanites, and so they were much more familiar with English. Now, normally, it really didn't matter in our social contact with each other, but it did matter when it came to English classes. And so you had, for example, a boy would read a story and he'd say, and then they lived happily ever after, themed. And the teacher, I remember saying, what are you saying? And he said, themed. And he said, no, what do you mean themed? And he said, sir, it's written here, T-H-E-E-N-D, themed. And he said, no, it's the end. So you'd have ludicrous situations like that. There was a teacher called Mr. Goldstein, and he marked. So he marked our presentations. We used to have to, every week, learn a poem and then recite it. And so he found that there was this disparity between the ruralites and the urbanites. And the only way he got around this was that the ruralites, who would get 3 out of 10, 4 out of 10, And the urbanites like Farooq Laghari or Kamal Hayat Sahib, etc., would get 19 out of 10 or 20 out of 10. So, 10 was the medium, even though normally it should have been the maximum. So there are things like this where there was not a distinction, not even a social distinction, but there was a very heavy emphasis on teaching English, although they did introduce, for example, Farsi, and there was a lot of effort on Urdu. But this has always remained a kind of difficulty within Aitchison because Urdu doesn't come naturally to the boys there. And I remember when applications were being sent by the boys for foreign universities, and those foreign universities used to ask, which foreign languages do you speak? And the boys would invariably write Urdu. To them, Urdu was a foreign language, you see, not French or German or Spanish. So there was this kind of, I wouldn't say prejudice, but I would say that there was a weakness in emphasizing Urdu as a parallel language, equally strong as English was. There are numerous incidents, obviously, but since I was only there for 3.5 years as a student, and then again 3.5 years, but the 3.5 years as a principal were crowded because my predecessor had been there for about 11 years or 12 years, and things had more or less settled, so there was a need, the board felt there was a need for a change, and I found that there were many improvements that could be brought, particularly in the preparing boys for going to foreign universities, because they thought that the A-levels were the end of the world, that was it. And their life's objective had been gained if they got 3 A-levels or 4 A-levels. And there was, for example, this rule that you had to have an A in maths in order to get into the A-level program, seen as such, which I thought was absurd, because why do you need A to get into science or arts or any other economics? So we had to make certain fundamental changes like that. But one tried to improve the quality of the education so that the children, for example, one of the innovations we brought in was that before the year began, I made all of the teachers at prep, junior and senior prepare a slide presentation on the curriculum that they would be teaching for the whole year. And they would then say, okay, term-wise, this is what we'll be doing. And then at the beginning of every week, they would tell the children of their particular, this is what we want, what we will be teaching you. And I thought that was important because then it makes it a kind of working relationship between the teacher and the student. They're not just, a teacher just doesn't walk in and say, well, I'd open at page 240 or something. And that seemed to work. And I thought that was, another innovation was to bring in other languages. And so we put a lot of emphasis on French and on Chinese. We introduced Chinese. And my reason for doing that was I felt that the Chinese, wherever our boys went, anywhere in the world, it is not that they would be educated in China, but that they would be competing with Chinese students in those countries. Because the number of Chinese students who are being enrolled in US, UK universities, Germany, anywhere in the world, was increasing. And so I didn't want our boys to be at a disadvantage as far as, integrating in but also to be able to understand and compete with Chinese children. It had a kind of side effect because many parents came and complained. Do you want me to stop? And they said, no, it's just कि हमारे बच्चे ये आपस में, this is after two years of learning Chinese, ये आपस में Chinese में बात करते हैं और हमें समझ नहीं आती. So could you run a course for us as parents to understand what they're saying? Now these are, I think these are important elements because, as I told the teachers in those days, don't teach the children what you know, teach them what they need to know. And what we're looking at is to prepare students at Aitchison College for the afterlife, for universities, wherever they go, whether they go to Qatar, whether they go to the US, whether they go to England, Japan, China, wherever. It is to prepare them for that, not simply to teach them rather antiquated, curriculum. In certain cases, it matters, science, etc. Fine, they're up to date. But in others, like English literature or languages, etc., I thought, and IT, these were areas which we needed to ensure that the boys were competitive in an international environment. So as far as the college was concerned, I think these are some of the things that I came away with. One of the most ludicrous was when a lady called me and she said, "Kitty, मुझे दाखला चाहिए जी." मैंने कहा अच्छा तो आप फॉर्म ले लीजिएगा. She said नहीं आप नहीं समझे, मैं अस्पताल में हूँ. मैंने कहा अल्लाह आपको शिफा दे. And she said नहीं जी डॉक्टर आप नहीं. मैंने कहा ड्राइवर भेज दें, वो फॉर्म ले लेगा. कि नहीं जी आप नहीं समझे, मैं अस्पताल से नहीं आ सकती क्योंकि मैं अभी डिलीवरी रूम से निकली हूँ. तो मैंने कहा जी मुबारक हो आपको. मेरे खामन ने कहा था कि अगर मैं बेटा पैदा करूँगी तो उसको एचएसएन में दाखला मिल जाएगा. तो मैं अभी डिलीवरी रूम से निकली हूँ और मैं कह रही हूँ कि मुझे दाखला दिलवा दो. So madam, it doesn't work that way. You have to wait 5 years और फिर ही आप कर सकते हैं. So these were sort of social, if you like, barometers of the popularity of Aitchison as an institution. And with the campus of 176 acres, the boys, whenever they wrote applications, they would say, I studied at Aitchison College, which was this. I said, listen, they're giving you admission, not the college. So focus on you, your own attributes as such. But it is inevitable with such a vast campus, with the facilities that they have, sports, riding, swimming, etc. These are not available to all of the schools here. They may have 1, 2, but very rarely at the scale that you have them for each of the 3 schools. Okay, so that I think is, and the question started because many of the families were landed families, and their boys came from rural areas. So they were used, riding was second nature to them. But over the years, as the number of boarders diminished and the day boys increased, we found that the day boys were not really as inclined towards riding, although some of them were very good, but nevertheless it was a personal choice. You couldn't force it on them. So that was why there was this, I would say yes, the principal who was there, inevitably everybody admires the principal because he's the focal point. But he was a gentleman called Mr. Gwynn. He was an Englishman. He was the last Englishman, in fact, who was to be principal in Aitchison College. He I regarded as a person who had a kind of personality. I was very young then as such. I would say that the mentorship, rather than who influenced me, but I would say that the mentorship role is something that every teacher has to perform, and particularly every housemaster in a boarding school has to perform. And because I was at boarding school in England, I carried with me the memory of boarding school in Pakistan, and it was very similar because Aitchison had been modeled on an English public school, on the pattern of that. But let me just give you an example. I'm embarrassed to say this, but I didn't do as well in my O-levels when I sat for them. And I, of course, breezed through it, the exam, thinking I know it all, and then discovered to my horror that I didn't get the number of subjects that I was aspiring to. The housemaster, he was a man called Wraith, Englishman, and he called me and he said, I'm disappointed in you. That's all he said. I'm disappointed in you. And जैसे कहते हैं ना कि सीख चला गया मेरे दिल. After that I said, now never again, And I worked very hard, etc. When I left school, he then retired and he went to New Zealand with his wife. Many years later, she wrote to me and said that we used to be in correspondence, and she wrote to me and said that he's died. And I'm bringing his ashes to the school, because there was a lovely rose garden which he had developed, and she wanted his ashes interred. I said, fine. She said he's left the gold watch that his father had received from the grandfather, and he wanted you to have it. So I was a little taken aback, and I said that, about 700 boys had passed through his hands over the years. I said, are you sure you got the right person? And she said, no, you're so-and-so. I said, yes. Your brother was so-and-so. I said, yes. You're the one. And so she came to London posted me this gold watch, it's a pocket gold watch, and said, "This is for you." Now, when you talk about mentorship, it was evidenced for me in that, so one day when before he died, he said, "You know that I used to keep a special eye on you for your progress." I said, "Why did you never tell me?" And he said, "Well, it would have destroyed the relationship if I'd let you know that I was watching what you're doing and following your progress." So he used to write to my father every week. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because this was something that I instituted equally in Aitchison, was that all the boarding houses, the masters, had to write to the parents and send them a photograph of the boy so that they could gauge how he was growing, and also just an assessment, a character assessment on him and about his studies, and because they were what they say in loco parentis, they were the parents, and so therefore they had to fulfill that role. So when you talk about mentorship, I think it's at different levels. One is, of course, within the school itself. The number two are the prefects and the head boy. That's very important because the boys look up to them. And the third are their peers, because you learn as much from your peers, rightly or wrongly, as you do from elders. And I think that you discover that later when you leave school. So many of the Aitchisonians I've noticed look for each other, they search for each other when they've gone to different universities, but that bonding is there. And I think that's where a subconscious mentorship is taking place. Well, of course, now I'm 82 years old, and so it's a long time, and many of my peers are no longer my peers. But more seriously, you'd be probably interested to know that 3 or 4 of my friends whom I can name, Aijazuddin, the famous painter, Kamal Hayat, Humayun Asid Sheikh, the industrialist, all of us, Iqbal Segal Sahab, all of us were young students, and we would all be sitting in the front row on the ground, in the school annual photograph. And they're still alive, mashallah, and I'm still in touch with them. So when you came in, for example, did you notice the roses? There was an Aitchisonian in my class in LJ House who encountered me somewhere. I was giving a lecture and he said, "Kitty, I was with you in LJ House and I'm so-and-so." I said, "Okay. And I grow roses and I want to come and plant some for you." And so 60 years later, this man arrived at the house with these roses as such. So when you talk about this, with your peers, with people that I think it's something, and you will experience this yourself, and you will experience this with your elders. They remain very close, sometimes too close. When I say that, I used to give dinner for the old boys, and so that particular group and various ages, and I found that when they came in with their wives, all the old boys would go into their respective classes and sit together, the old boys, and the wives were left on the right-hand side and having to make small sweet talk. So I then addressed the ladies and I said, "You've noticed that they're all ganging up because they're all with their buddies, hum jamaatiyon ke saath baithe hue hain." So I said, "How does it feel meeting the first wife?" So these women were a little taken aback. I said, "Aap to saukan hai na, asal biwi to inki Aitchison thi, aap to baad mein aayi hain." So as I said, if you see, ye aapke saath nahi baithe, ye foreign apne Aitchisonians ke saath baith ke. Now that was a rather light-hearted way of saying it, but that deep bonding that exists at school can only happen in an environment like Aitchison's, which is protective, which is in a sense insular, right? It's exclusive, but I think the compensation is that the standards that they expect of their boys are much higher than in other schools. I'm not denigrating other schools, I'm just saying that the standards to which they are expected to rise are much higher, and they remain with them throughout their life. Oh, it'd be very difficult because, I mean, it depends whether you're a boarder or a day boy, it depends whether you're a sports person or a co-curricular academic, or it can vary. I think the most important thing is that you realize that what matters is that you are immensely privileged, and not because of your background, but because of the facilities that are available and the quality of education that you're receiving there. So that sense of enrichment, not entitlement, but enrichment, is something that you have, all Aitchisonians should carry with them. And they do. And they've excelled, whether it's Aijazuddin, whether it was Farooq Laghari who became the president, all of them. I mean, each one has contributed. And the second is, using this word contribution, when Robert Kennedy was asked, what do you want to be remembered for? Kennedy or as an attorney general or whatever, and his response was that I want to be remembered for having made a contribution to society. And that is really what Aitchisonians should aspire to, that when they leave the college, they don't have to give money to the college, but they have to give of themselves. And the prime example of this is Babar Ali Sahab, who has donated, he's been on the board for about 70 years or something, and he's donated libraries, he's donated, given money, and as Kamal Bunu Sahab has done for the boarding house. So that contribution is something which sustains Aitchison College as an institution, but it also is I think the common link between all of the Aitchisonians. So wherever they are Aitchisonians, but they have that umbilical relationship with the institution. So whenever they come back, their first instinct is to return to the college. Not out of nostalgia, but because there is this sense of, how can I put it, a debt owed by them to the college for making them who they are. And many of them have done wonderfully. So, and I think that's important, when the college should take pride in their achievements, and they should take pride in the next generation of Aitchisonians. Now, I believe that's an important question, and particularly nowadays in the environment, because when social standards are threatened, okay, it is important for us to remember that there were our parents had a different social system, a value system. Before that, there were others. My grandparents had it. I have it. And now you've met my granddaughter. She has. So, in every case, there are changes, and we are forced to adapt. Adaptation per se is not a problem. What is important, and it was something that recently in the elections, when one of the parties was talking about tabdili, and I said, well, it's not tabdili you're looking for, it's Betri. Tabdili is, I move into your chair and you move into mine. Change. But what we're talking about is improvement. And I think that has to be the mantra that is, the motto that is available, in the same way as you have perseverance, command, success. And it's remained there for 125, 140 years. What matters now is that we recognize that Pakistan it's got a population of 250 million people. Few of them have the opportunity of going to a place like Aitchison. Few of the girls certainly not. So I think that one does not need to diminish the standards, but one does need to make, if it is a good institution, then one needs to expand it and make that quality of education available elsewhere. Why should a Multani why should he have to come to Lahore to be educated? Why should a person from DG Khan or from Swat or from Gilgit come? Now Lums is a very good example of that. That you've got people in the outreach program, as they call them, and you have that in Aitchison as well, the outreach program. But it's limited to a given number of children. But why not have an Aitchison in Gilgit, Baltistan? Why not have a heresy though it is? But I think that's important. That's important. The first is integrity. I think it supersedes all. It's not education, it's moral integrity. The ability to be able to, see yourself in your environment. Number two is to be able to see how how you can remain immune despite the temptations by which you'll be surrounded. It's so easy, I mean, for us to be honest, provided everybody else is honest. But it's much more difficult to be honest when more or less everybody else is corrupt. And that is when you're tested. So I would say that the prime quality would be integrity, moral, social, political integrity, financial integrity. All of these come together like a Rubik's Cube. You're rotating them and you get different combinations, different permutations appear. But I think essentially it's you. And you, during the course of your life, as you were at school, you'll be rotated by different challenges, and you'll have to then respond to those challenges. And the whole idea is that you do not break any of the tiles while you're rotating them, and that you emerge really not a perfect pattern, but you emerge as a person who feels that I did my best. I did my best. But let me put it another way. I was exposed to education per se in a formative way when I was a principal. Less so as a high school student, because I never went to high school. As I told you, I was about 13, I went to England. I would say as a principal, I found that the anomalies that existed in the Pakistan educational system were highlighted, all right, at Aitchison and at other schools. So whether they were at brother schools like Lawrence College or Sadiq Public School, etc., the same kind of challenges. They were also boarding schools. And the second was the fact that we were in the middle of a city, and you could almost draw, I'm not sure what the position is now, you could draw a line at the canal. Everybody who lived, west of the canal, I'm talking about who lived Mill Gardens, Diwar, that side, and everybody who lived beyond that, DHA, Cantonment, DHA, and. So the dividing line was the canal. 15% of the then, and I'm talking when I was a principal, came from the Mill Garden side, and 80% of them also came from Gulberg, DHA, it's a Cantonment, Defence. And I thought that was so strange because, we were not representative of the whole of the city of Lahore. Andruna Shahr se koi nahi tha, So in that sense, it had become, the schism had become so obvious. So I would say that the enduring quality that Aitchison, that boys were leaving, and which is integration. They should learn to integrate. Merely because they were at Aitchison doesn't mean that they were born to rule. They may be equipped to rule, but not necessarily born to rule. And so they have to earn that place and earn that trust. And the only way you can earn it is by doing it and showing that you're an achiever. Okay, well, it sounds like a birthday, isn't it? I mean, how would you imagine your life without birthdays? Can you imagine when you were a child and waking up and knowing that it's your birthday and nobody wishing you or having a cake ready or having a party for you? So in that sense, Aitchison is, the Founders' Day is important because it is an annual, I put a reminder of your school, but also I'd say it's a replenishment of your commitment to the school. And you can see how over the years the school is changing. It may not be perceptible, but year to year you get a different perspective. You may be at an assembly every Friday, but it doesn't have the same effect as being at a Founders' Day. When we, at the beginning of every year, academic year, we used to have children coming in at K2 level, all right, or K1 even, and K1, K2, and the bulk of them, 250 of them would come in at that, and then the boys who moved from prep, junior to prep, and from prep to senior. So in order to give them an idea of what this transition involved, at the first assembly of the new year, of the new term, I'd ask the boys who were leaving or who had already left, you see, from, if they could come back, but many of them, of course, at universities. But we would ask the boys in prep school, who were in E2, M1, to move to senior school. And so physically, they would leave prep school, the part of the, and move in the auditorium to the amphitheater and move into senior school. And then we'd ask the junior school boys of K5 to leave the junior school section and move into the prep school section. And then we would bring in the K1s and the K2s. And suddenly these 250 children would walk in. And the school, there was a gasp as the persons in the senior school looked and could see that they were the same age. And suddenly all those memories came back to them of how their first day at school and how they were as fresh inductees. Now the reason I say this to you is it was just a simple way of conveying to the children that, you know, you're moving from one to another. So it's not just a question of walk. And what I would do is, for example, when children were selected for the respective schools, so the boys who were in M1 would be the hosts for the E5 children, K5. So when they were moving to prep school, the prep school boys who had been at junior school the year before would now be the hosts, and they would escort the boys who were likely to come into coming into prep school. So like that, there was a transition because they knew them, and you know, they've been with them in the previous year. So I think this kind of bonding is important. Now, the greatest occasion when they get together is Founders Day. And so a thing I introduced in Founders Day was, they used to have the old boys in a procession. I said, come on, why don't you do it by years, by decades? So we'd begin with pre-1950. And there were old boys still alive. And so we had one banner which was for 1950. And then 50 to 60, 60 to 70, 70 to 80, 80 to 90. And like that, you could see the number who was still alive, right? And we honored them. And then you moved into the current. So that was an occasion, Founders Day, for us to be able to revive those memories. And many of them, Zulfikar Ali Bukhari Sahab, for example, who had been at Aitchison in 1942, he always came wearing his school blazer. By the grace of God, he had not put on an ounce. And so there he was in his old school blazer, you know, marching. So that was a nice thing. And for young children at Aitchison to be able to see that, look, this is what our elders were, and they were our age once. So that is the occasion, that is what Founders Day encourages and allows. Survival. I survived. Look, nobody owns Aitchison College. That's the first thing. The second is that it is a trusteeship. You go there, you hope that what you're doing is in the children's interest. And as I said, that what you're doing, what one aspires to do, is to provide quality education in as contemporary a situation as possible, but most importantly is to prepare them for the afterlife. All right, and by that I mean not after death, but after the school and after A-levels. So it's to know what to expect at universities, what is the kind of life that they have to expect. Many may have heard about it, they may have seen it, but not all the boys who go are as equipped. So I used to tease them a little, and I said, just remember that when you go to Western universities, that the persons that you see in skirts are not Aitchisonians in drag, okay? Because up to now, all the parts that are performed in Aitchison plays are done by boys dressed as girls. So please, you know, keep an open mind. But more seriously, I would regard this is one of the responsibilities of anybody who heads an institution like Aitchison, any institution. They have to have that, how can I put it, empathy with the children, and understanding that this is what the children expect and need. They may not be able to articulate it, but it's for the head of the institution to define and then set the standards as such. The fact that I'm sitting in front of you and answering your questions, I hope, is one way of answering it. It means a lot, because without that, I'm not saying that I would have been a lesser or better person. I think that it has provided a life support system for me. As I say, many of my friends are still alive who were at school with me, and in the same class, and they're in their 80s. So what matters, what I think must matter to anybody who's been to a school like Aitchison, but particularly to Aitchison, what must matter is whether they have come away enriched from that process. And the fact that I can be sitting here with you, and the fact that I've written the history of Aitchison College for the first 100 years and 125 years, the fact that I'm still, enjoy walking around the campus, that I think is the unbreakable bond between myself and Aitchison. I would say that for every generation of Aitchisonians, honor the institution. And when I say honor, that means it will not always be independent. It will not always be solvent. That means it may need money. It may not always be the institution that you want it to be. But remember that it's your institution, and it was the institution that made you. And therefore, anything that you can do whenever you're called upon, as you'll do when you come back from university, and whether you choose to be here or abroad, but whatever you can do to contribute to the perpetuation of those values in Aitchison, I think that is what, and Aitchison is blessed. When you think about it, 125 years and more, plus, the land is the same, the schools are the same, the buildings are, okay, there are more buildings, but essentially it's recognizable Aitchison, old building, वगैरह वगैरह. तो इससे ये मुझे एहसास होता है, इस ज़मीन में बरकत है. It's not for nothing that it has been protected for 125 years. Name any one of the other institutions, apart from public monuments like the fort, etc., which have survived for so long, intact. Okay, Punjab University, etc., have, but I'm talking about secondary schools, etc. So इसमें बड़ी बात होती है, and so for that reason, I think the message one would give to any Aitchisonian is never forget who made you. Never, because you didn't make yourself. और कुरान शरीफ में कोई एक आयत है कि अगर आपके वालिदैन कुछ भी कहें तुम्हें, आप उफ ना कहना. आपको, you're familiar with this, उफ ना कहना, क्योंकि they were there when you were young, and when you needed them, they were there. And now that they are old and they need you, never question. And in that sense, I would say Aitchisonian is more than just a mother or a father. It's a grandparent and a great-grandparent and a great-great-grandparent, क्योंकि कितनी नस्लें वहाँ से गुजरी हैं. अब जब मैं फ़कीर ज़हूरुद्दीन का जिक्र कर रहा हूँ, फ़कीर ज़हूरुद्दीन साहब was my 7th ancestor, 7 above, me. So it's a long, long association. It's a family association, and it's something that forces you to remember that, you're just one out of a long line.